Images. As I often do, sitting down to determine how best to express the unfolding celestial dance that each week has in store for us. The image that I get is that of a lottery or bingo kind of scenario where the multitude of options are rolling and dancing and bouncing into each other around in a cauldron, determining, who am I going to bounce into? Who am I going to play with next? And, and then one is chosen and it rolls out to the fore and it's red. And you go, okay, well, the energy that is being initiated by this particular week at the very beginning of July has that lottery option as to which of those cards, numbers, coins, balls is going to roll to the surface in this moment to be considered. 2 weeks ago, my computer that I use for doing chart readings and stuff died. And it took me until this week to finally get it back up and running again. It was a little concerning, a consternation, if you will. And in one sense, maybe it was preparing me for one of the signatures that this upcoming week is bringing for our considerations. And this is Mercury retrograde. So many ways. I could spend the whole entire hour talking about Mercury retrograde, but I'll try and be as succinct as I possibly can in looking at this particular Mercury retrograde. This is the middle one for this year. It's in the sign of Cancer. And Cancer is the signature of the healer, the protector, the matriarch, the mother, the naturer, nurturer, the cook, and the counselor. There's a realm of consideration that moves around the sign of Cancer. It wants to bring us home in one fashion or another, to allow us to discover what does home mean to us in particular. I'm not going to delve into that. Just allow your consciousness to think of home. Now, the energies of what is going to be unfolding from this week going forward through this next Mercury retrograde cycle. I think it would be advisable for us to, gird up our loins, so to speak, for the things that are going to transpire. I think of the saying, I don't even know where it came from, but astrology doesn't necessarily compel. It doesn't tell us what's going to happen, but it kind of reveals conditions or potentials of things that are around us that that they're inviting us to participate consciously in the unfolding of our lives based on factors that are in play that are not telling us necessarily what it is that's going to happen, but are inviting us to participate in that dance in a way that each one of us very uniquely has the responsibility of taking steps along a path with options. Now, I say, if I were to just look at Monday, I'm not going to put the chart up just quite yet. Mars enters Gemini as Sunday becomes Monday. Mars is our, that driving, impulsive, striking out kind of energy that wants to do something. It's landed in the realm of Mercury, Gemini. Our capacity to, arrange our thoughts in, particular fashions in order to accomplish something. As Monday becomes Tuesday, Mercury goes retrograde. Now, this happens 3 times a year. Mercury does this retrograde dance. There are flavors to any Mercury retrograde cycle. One way to perceive this is how many degrees of the zodiac is Mercury going to move backwards through, and how long a period of time. Generally a Mercury retrograde is about 3 weeks. Sometimes they're a little bit longer, sometimes a little bit shorter. And while this isn't often considered, but the longer time frame of a Mercury retrograde cycle allows for the development of a process to not be rushed through. This particular Mercury retrograde cycle covers 10 degrees of the zodiac, from Cancer 26 to Cancer 16. That's just 10 degrees. The one in February, March, covered, 23, 21, 22 to 8. A lot more degrees. And the one coming up in the fall, the winter, it covers just about that same amount. A much longer set of degrees. So the impact of this particular Mercury retrograde dance is compressed into just these 10 degrees, starting from 26 to 16 degrees of Cancer. Those of us who are or have particular chart significators in the cardinal signs, in that 26 to 16 degree window of any one of the cardinal signs, Aries, Cancer, Libra, or Cancer or Capricorn, will likely, I'm going to say be impressed, feel, sense, if you will, this intensification of how this Mercury retrograde cycle will unfold. let's consider the mechanics of how a Mercury retrograde cycle unfolds. The initiation, when Mercury turns retrograde, is when Mercury is basically rising after the sun. It's following the sun. Epimetheus, something that is taking place that it's tuned into paying attention to what is considered the normal or natural process that we go through. That's Epimetheus, not trying to, strike out that which is Prometheus, which is when Mercury's on the rising before the sun, kind of an experience that is trying to pre-think everything. Epimetheus is more of an afterthought. Why is it that I did so and so or such and such along the way? This is Epimetheus at work, as opposed to Prometheus. This is like, I don't need to think about what it is I'm going to do. I'm just going to do it. The impulse of life is more along. Well, this Epimethean initiation of the Mercury retrograde cycle is an invitation to consider what has led me to the experiences that currently need to be considered. In one sense, it's almost like a 12th house kind of energy, where the evaluation of what and why I am at this particular point in time are going to be or need to be reflected upon as I attempt to determine what the next steps along the life process could, would, or should be. This is happening in our thinking processes. And this is often why, at a personal level, this is often why you hear the explanation of a Mercury retrograde cycle as carrying this energy where the potential conversations or interaction that we have with others are not spelled out with overt clarity, able to transpire between us, between one another, because, that 12th house consideration of, why is it that I have gotten to this point? And because I'm thinking so much about it, I don't really have the bandwidth to be able to, keep my antenna up effectively enough to engage with you on the things that you are doing that are similar in your own worlds. And so the communication, Mercury, it can lapse into an area where our conversations are taking place, but even while we converse, my mind is, so busy rolling thoughts back and forth and over that I cannot hear you with enough clarity to actually be able to follow what it is that you are trying to tell me. This is Mercury retrograde. Now, in any retrograde cycle, we're talking about Mercury right now, there's a point in the center, which is why I chose this particular image for today. This point in the center, right here, this is when Mercury and the Sun conjoin. And this sets in motion a perspective on the whole unfolding process of a Mercury retrograde cycle. Yes, it begins at 26 degrees of Cancer. The very center point, when the Sun and Mercury are holding hands. Picture, if you will, a substantial shift in the energy signature. From Epimethean, trying to determine, how I got here to this point, to Promethean. What is it that I actually want to accomplish? That 20 degrees in the middle. It gives an answer to how best to utilize, or one way to utilize, this particular cycle. A way to bring to focus is to look at the Sabian symbol for that central Sun conjunct Mercury point, when, as with any Sun conjunct a planet, sets in motion the beginning of a cycle. Something new, seeking, awakening. The Sabian symbol for that 20th degree of Cancer reads, "A famous singer is proving her virtuosity during an operatic performance." The keynote, the emotional reward accompanying cultural excellence. The further explanation, I think, is relevant, so I'm going to just read it. If anything represents the type of response that is well-developed society gives to the individual who successfully pours his or her energy into the skillful externalization of the great images of its culture, it is the opera. The operatic prima donna is not merely a lonely performer, like the piano virtuoso. He or she is the star in a collective effort. The opera is not only music, but a story, a mythos, which embodies some of the most basic images and emotions characterizing the culture that gave it birth. Euro-American culture is indeed extolled or condemned by its operas and their lurid and tragic passions. It is interesting to compare the opera with the equivalent type of social performances and their topics in India, Java, or Tibet. Here we find the drive toward individualization by means of concrete forms of cultural activity glorified in social and financial success. In its deepest sense, the symbol refers to the price of success for the individual as well as the collectivity acclaiming him or her. What is success really worth? A question few ask. So as, and this, basically, we're going to be in this Mercury retrograde cycle till the 23rd of July. There's a lot going to happen during those 3 weeks. So that first half of this cycle, when we're considering what brought us to the point that we're in right now, you can kind of feel the energy of, if we want to look at the bottom, the past. What is it that in the past has brought us to this consideration and is bringing us to a point of focus? That moment when the Sun and Mercury cross paths in that center. What part of this cultural perspective are we tuned into? What is being asked of us to initiate as we, spread our wings, still in this Mercury retrograde cycle, still in Cancer, hoping to enfold, if you were, more of the potential of why we are here. This is Mercury. Something to think about there. Nothing exists in a vacuum. There are so many other factors underway. It's Saturday as I sit down to really try and assist each of us in choosing an optimal direction for how to play this upcoming Mercury retrograde dance. Because any Mercury retrograde cycle is an invitation to, reflect, reconsider what it is that got us to this point and what is or is not worth hanging on to if we are going to be able to expand our perspective enough to be made new in this dance cycle. As the week begins, the moon is out of bounds. We're in the Cancer cycle, so that moon has a lot to say about what is transpiring. It's also a full moon that transpires on this Monday. Maximum reflected light upon what was initiated at the last new moon in Gemini. There's our mercurial factor there in play again, saying, what is it that my mental capacity set in motion 2 weeks ago at the new moon that wanted to facilitate perhaps a more fluent or effective capacity to speak, to organize the thoughts in such fashion that what can transpire between us when we come together will push a little bit more deliberately at being of effect with and to one another. A full moon here, up there out of bounds in Capricorn, is asking us, what is the potential in leadership, Capricorn, to the collective, also Capricorn, some Aquarius thought in there, that has the potential for meaningful context for as many as possible. So we begin this week on Monday, a moon day, with this full moon asking us, have I been effective in what it is that I intended for this lunar cycle up to this point? That the signature set in motion at that new moon carries the appropriate quality of meaning I intended? At this same time, a new player, actually I shouldn't say a new player, Mars, one of the celestial players, has just shifted into Gemini. Feel the impulse to want to communicate? Mercury at work. Now, who is the Mercury that is going to work? Is he is he a statesman? A politician? A trickster? A merchant? These are all mercurial kinds of... Is it the essence of Hermes, able to travel back and forth between the realms of creation, from the heavens to the hells, carrying with it the souls that need to be transported to and from either of those locations? I have to bring this up because in very short order, Tuesday, Mercury goes retrograde. But that's not all that happens on that day. Jupiter, which has been exalted in its long, including retrograde cycle in Cancer, has shifted into Leo. There's a certain expansion, if you will, of this energy that wants to, express in solar fashion. We're talking Leo here. Essences that seek audience. And yet at the same time, Mercury has begun its retrograde cycle. What does the Sabian symbol have to say for that particular degree where Mercury has just shifted? A violent storm in a canyon filled with expensive homes. That's the symbol for the degree of this Mercury turning retrograde. In the keynote, a confrontation with a social upheaval demanding the reconsideration of static values. Further, the deeper implications of the scene depicted in the symbol are that the socio-cultural elite can always see its position and security challenged by forces beyond its control, even if it may be successful in protecting itself from destruction. The individual may not be able to depend on the standards and values he has acquired through education and through a relatively sheltered and rich life. He has to rise to the occasion and perhaps to undergo an inner metamorphosis as a result of the crises he has been able to accept as a personal challenge. Peace in luxury and intellectual development in terms of collective cultural values, reading books for instance, then the challenge to meet a crisis situation produced by uncontrollable karmic forces that could lead to a successful catharsis. Tuesday is a Mars day. And if we look at Mars over here, Mars is coming into a dance with Uranus. So picture, if you will, a driving, impulsive Gemini curiosity that, from a Mercury retrograde perspective, isn't necessarily going to be that clear as one might aspire toward. Bumping into Uranus, the land of unpredictability, the land of revolution. I don't know about you, but I can sense a fairly substantial unrest that exists at the global level currently. You know, there's potentially that Uranus energy at work, you know. Can you sense the discomfort with the way things are going now on the planet? This Mars-Uranus dance it's going to play a significant signature in our July 4th celebration here in this country. Because on that day, Mars and Uranus are going to be right together. Anyway, we've come to Thursday already, July 2nd, the The moon is no longer in Capricorn. It has moved into Aquarius. It's just crossed paths with Pluto in early Aquarius. We're still in the sign of Cancer. So the moon's signature, or footprint, if you will, is carrying some weight with it. This experience, I want to make sure that I do not underemphasize Pluto's signature in the Pluto, Neptune, Uranus miniature trine. You see that on the chart? These three outermost planets have to deal with the areas of, do I want to call it psychological underpinnings of, factors that culturally are underway as the underpinnings of what it is that at the individual level with our personal planets, that Mercury, Venus, Mars kind of thing, and the social implications of Saturn and Jupiter in a unique dance of trying to facilitate something in the here and now. And these larger underpinning energies of the transpersonal planets, Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus, in a trine. So they're speaking to each other effectively. So that kind of energy is, it's actually in effect for all of us right now, asking us deep and profound questions. And this is all transpiring right now at the very beginning of this Mercury retrograde dance that we've just entered into in that sign of Cancer, that cardinal reality. And cardinal signs want to make something happen, to initiate something. And yet, it's Mercury retrograde. Trying to put your finger deliberately on what it is that we're trying to focus on is not necessarily going to be something that's just going to be handed to you. There are questions that come from deep within, seeking answers that are going to require that 12th house kind of contemplation. Why is it that we are here at this point? What is it that has created this kind of situation or situations that we find ourselves in now? That doesn't necessarily mean that answers are going to appear readily because we've asked those questions. We're in a Mercury retrograde cycle. This is going to take some work, some meditation, if you will. Perhaps some, not necessarily easily conversed sharing that we have with others, because after all, Mercury's retrograde. But with deliberation in the attempt to share our thoughts with one another as best we can during a Mercury retrograde initiated experience that, are seeking answers. And even though we may only be half listening, I believe that if we enter into this particular Mercury retrograde dance with some deliberation, of an attempt to try and listen. That is a part of the communication experience, listening. And I can guarantee you, it isn't going to be easy. But try to hear this, perhaps subtle or more subtle messages that are, stirring around and resonating deep within each of us as to what is transpiring now. Friday, almost the weekend, almost the 4th of July. Oh, look at that. Mars and Uranus right there at 3 degrees of Gemini. Ooh, curious, he asks, what does this 3rd degree of Gemini have to say from the Sabian symbol perspective? I haven't even looked that up yet to see what it has to say. But being as it's more than just a wee bit relevant. Well, holly and mistletoe reawaken old memories of Christmas. The keynote, a longing for the pre-intellectual state of consciousness. Pardon me. Further, the intellect, ruled by the ego, has taken all that had been seen by the translucent mind, in parentheses, the glass-bottomed boat, which is probably another one of these Sabian symbols, and has given it a logical, rational form. Yet old memories of childhood and its naive faith sometimes make their way into the consciousness. They are aroused by what remains of the ancestral images that once had great vitality and power, in parentheses, mistletoe, as sacred to the Druids. The holly, with its brilliant contrast of red and green, recalls a more primitive and magical sense of color, as exemplified in Tibetan art. A nostalgia for more natural and feeling-oriented values tends to lead to a movement of protest. Thus, to the intensification of the emotions in the individual personality, or to romantic movement after the post-classical, post-rationalistic European period. This aspect is going to be with us, has been with us for a few days, and will linger. As I'm sitting here, I'm getting the image of that, Christmas celebration. I want this, I really want that, and the unwrapping of the unknown to experience what is it that has been, so gleefully put together in front of me to expose. And at the same time, I see two very different personages. One whose delight is so phenomenal, almost to bring the tears of joy to the eyes, and the other, a disdain of why didn't I get what I wanted? Disgust. These are two different sides of the very same coin. That's the key. Very same coin. What is it that has set the teeter-totter of life in such fashion that finding balance is a unique challenge, where often one is much more adamant than the other, and then it shifts and the other becomes the prominent. This is the life dance. It's not that one is better than the other. They both exist. They require each other, actually, in this life dance to expand upon the creative side that exists within each of us in such fashion that we can trip into those hard, challenging moments with an effective perspective to recognize that this isn't the whole picture and that there is a brighter future ahead. We just have to, gird up our loins and do the appropriate thing to know the soul that is our guiding light in each moment. And Mercury continues its retrograde dance. Sunday, end of the week. Stay focused. We're still in that window of the Epimethean Mercury part of the cycle. Hunting, if you will, in a 12th house perspective, to make sure that we are appropriately and as accurately as we can perceiving why it is we are where we are at this moment, without the necessity necessarily of seeing the appropriate picture of the potential for something else. This is still that part of the Mercury retrograde cycle where the investigation of history is having us, potentially relive factors that have brought us to this moment, to ferret out what is the reason for why we are here. Joining, you may have noticed, this mini triangle of Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus is that Mars signature. And Mars is saying, how can I stir the pot? How can I take those, potentially subliminal outer planet energies that are all speaking quite adamantly with one another and bring them down into this personal space collectively, Pluto in Aquarius, in such fashion that we might recognize the dynamics that we each bring into this collectivity that at an individual level we should pay attention to. And the impulse Mars drive in Mercury retrograde sign Gemini, is it, potentially bringing hints of clarity into what it is that we are about? Or, might there be something just a wee bit more dramatic that sits as discomfort with the way things are going on right now? Throw that into the Mercury retrograde hopper. Shake it. And like at my beginning consideration of the lottery, what is it that pops out as inspiration for a next step along a path that we hadn't anticipated? Oh, you gotta love Mercury retrograde. All those well thought out, machinations of a potential direction to go into. Well, during a Mercury retrograde cycle, it ain't guaranteed. And this is just the beginning of the month. There are other factors. Stay tuned, because they're going to show up as this month unfolds. There's a lot of things that are going to happen this month that, I would be reticent to tell you that things are going to flow easily and readily. I mean, Mercury's going to be retrograde till the 23rd. And I've got both June and July in front of me. When I sit down to put what's going to be happening during the month, I highlight those things that are significant. As you can see, there's a bunch, and we're just going to have to basically approach each of those moments as they unfold before us. I can just guarantee you that we've got some very unique energies afoot for July that our Mercury retrograde cycle is probably going to challenge us in ways we haven't anticipated. I think that's about all I need to say for today. I probably said more than enough, and catch you all for next week. Ciao.